Hey everybody, it's Ollie from flightcomp, and it's a rainy Saturday morning in Southern California, so I can't go outside and play. But I wanted to make a series of videos about the Graupner MZ32 and setting it up for a sailplane, whether it be F3J or 5J or 3B or whatever you might fly. I've had my MZ32 for quite a bit, but I haven't really used it. I was in the middle of a contest season. I didn't really want to switch radios, but it's wintertime now, so I think I'm going to actually get to grips with it and put it on some more of my models. So we're going to run through some of the programming basics. It'll probably be a multi-part series. We're going to start with the basics, just setting up the servos and getting everything to move the right way. And to help us out, I've actually 3D printed a miniature, let's call it a F3J plane. I whipped it up in about 10 minutes on my 3D printer. Actually, just kidding, it took me a few weeks. It was pretty tough, but I got it together. And I think it's really going to help me demonstrate to you how to use the radio and set it up. And as you can see, it actually has working surfaces. So let's get started. All right, let's go ahead and set up a new model. And to do that, we're going to go to Model List. We're going to touch a number here, plus, and then we get to name it. So we'll just do Test, Enter. And then we get this menu here, which gives us the type of model it is. It could be helicopter, boat, car, whatever. Wing type, tail type, throttle minimum position, whether your zero throttle is towards the front of the throw or the back of the throw. Engine, how many engines it has, and stick mode. So let's go through this. Wing type. You have lots of different options for wing types. So if you have a big scale model or something with multiple surfaces, you can figure out which one will work for you. We're going to select 2 ailerons and 2 flaps. And tail type, you can have a normal cross tail, a V-tail, or a split elevator. We're going to stick with the normal. Throttle minimum. Here we're going to pretend we're doing a sailplane that doesn't have a motor on it. So what we'll do is we'll select this and we'll just select none. And then that tells us here that we have no engine. And stick mode, mode 2. Okay, so that's all good. We'll go create and apply, and then it's going to load up our new model. Okay, we have our test model loaded up. Now before I even go and bind this to our display model that I made, I'm going to run through a few things first. So what I'm going to do now is activate the air brake and assign the air brake feature to a control. By default, it doesn't do that for you. If we go back to the base menu and select model types, we'll get the same menu where we selected what kind of wing and tail our model had right here. Now if we scroll through, we see all of a sudden this brake function pops up, which was not displayed initially. So that's a little strange. I don't know why that happens. But anyway, it's up now. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the input and we're going to assign that to, instead of the brake, we're going to assign that to our flap. Now, if you had a glider with spoilers and not flaps, you would leave this on brake and then assign your spoiler servos to brake. But since we have 2 flaps, we're going to select flap. And that's basically it for here. We'll go back. And now what we have to do is assign our flap servos to our throttle stick. To do that, we'll go to Control Set. Now, right away, we have channel 1 as brake. If we had a motor, I believe this channel 1 would be throttle. And the control assigned to brake is stick 1, which is the throttle stick. So we're just going to touch this, And I'm just going to delete this for now. And now we have nothing assigned here. And then we're going to scroll down and we get to our first flap. Touch the control button. And now we can assign the throttle stick to the flap. And all you have to do is move the flap stick and automatically the radio recognizes it. Now in this menu, we have a reverse feature, a type, and a throw display here. So, type. This is a two-way throw. You also have the option of a one-way throw, and a few others which aren't really applicable, a switch. What you want is the two-way throw like this, so it looks like the hourglass. You definitely want to assign a two-way throw because obviously you have to move the flaps up when you mix them to the ailerons and for reflex and things like that. If you assign just a one-way throw, you're going to run into a whole lot of problems setting up your airplane. So assign it to a two-way throw and hit OK. Now let's go back and check that our flap to elevator compensation is working properly in the air brake menu. So to do that, we're going to go to Function, and then we're going to go touch the air brake icon. And here we have a brake to elevator compensation button here. We'll touch this. And we see we have basically a mix menu where you can assign a curve mix with points and everything. And what I want to do right now is just check that this yellow line is moving the right way when I deflect the flaps. So let's move the flap stick, and we see the yellow line is moving properly. So that's set up. We're definitely going to come back to this menu when we do our flap to elevator compensation. But for now, we have the bare bones basics set up. And what we're going to do is bind the radio to the test model and start setting it up. Okay, I've bound the radio to the model, and now we can get into some of the basic setup on the flight surfaces. As you can see, the ailerons are working. We have the elevator working and the rudder working, and the flaps are moving. So the first thing we'll do is get our direction of travel set. I'm going to go into the radio, into the servo set menu, and these arrows are the reverse icons for the channels, so you can just touch them and reverse whatever channel you need to. So let's start with the ailerons. Okay, it looks like my ailerons are moving in the right direction. Let's move on to the elevator. Elevator is moving in the right direction. Rudder. Rudder happens to be moving in the right direction. Now let's pull the flaps. And the flaps are moving in the wrong direction. So I need to scroll through on the servo set menu and reverse both my flaps. Now when I pull the stick all the way down, the flaps are moving in the right direction. The next thing I'm going to do is go back to our air brake menu and just ensure, now that I reversed the flaps, that the elevator compensation is still working, and it is. So the next thing I'm going to do is center all my surfaces, and again that is in the servo set menu. We can see we have trims here, so just click on one of the trims and you can move the slider, or you can go up and down. So I'll go ahead and trim up all my surfaces. Get them roughly where they need to be. Looks like the ailerons are pretty well centered. I got my flaps somewhat centered. Elevator looks good. The rudder's a little off. Okay. Ailerons moving, flaps moving, elevator, rudder. So basically everything is moving in the right direction now. Okay, the next thing I like to do is actually rename some of the channels to make it easier on myself to do the programming. So we have our model set up. So what we can do is we can test the channels. So we'll start with channel 2, which just says aileron. And I'm just going to grab the trim and move it. And that's moving the right aileron. So I'll set that back to 0. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually touch the aileron icon, and you can actually rename it. So I'm going to call that aileron R, so I know it's the right aileron. This is going to make it much easier for me to quickly program the model. So obviously, the next aileron here is labeled aileron 2, so I'm going to touch that, hit the pencil icon, and I'm going to rename this aileron L. So now we have aileron L, and we can do the same thing with the flaps. I have a feeling the first flap is going to be the right flap, but we can test it. I'll just move the trim, and it is the right flap, so I'll take it back to where I had it. Okay, and I'm just going to rename this. Again, touch the pencil icon, and I'll just put a R there, so we know that's right flap. Do the same thing for flap 2. That's going to be our left flap. Touch the pencil icon. Enter. So now we know exactly what is what. Left flap, right aileron, left aileron, etc. Okay, we can move on to setting up the throws. So we'll start with the right aileron. And if we move across here, we have our travel limits, and then we have our overall limits. So what I'm going to do first is I like to start with the actual limit and not the travel, because I want to set the total travel window that the servo could possibly move without binding first. It's very important to set these limits so that you don't run into any binding and you don't break your push rods or servos in certain situations, like if you've mixed something to something else and there's a possibility to overdrive the surface. So I'm going to set up a hypothetical here. I'm not going to actually measure. I'll just hypothetically say we want 100% throw as our limit on our ailerons. So we'll just take these down to 100%. And then I'm going to go to the left aileron and do the same thing. 100. 100. And now, when we move the ailerons, in no situation can these surfaces drive past the limits that we've set up. So next thing we can do on the ailerons is set up the travel throws. And if we move the surfaces, we can see that we're getting a lot more down than up. Now we can adjust this in the differential menu, but I like to have both surfaces moving the same amount up and down first, and then go into differential as I need it. That way I know that I'm getting the right value of differential that I actually input into the radio. So I'm going to reduce the down throw, and we'll reduce the down travel until it roughly matches the up. So I'm going to say 70%. And we'll do that for the left aileron as well. So now if we move our ailerons we should be getting roughly the same amount down as up, and we still have a little more down, so I'm going to take some more down out on both. Okay. Now we have our ailerons working. Now I'm going to set the limits on my flaps. I don't want to overdrive my flaps. So we'll go back to the servo set menu and we'll just run through and do the same thing with the flaps. I'm not going to show all this stuff on film because it'll just be too boring. But I'm going to make sure I don't overdrive my flaps, especially on the downside. Okay, now I've got my flap throw set on the downside. Now you can go ahead and set your limits on all your surfaces, ailerons, flaps, rudder, elevator, and then you basically have a base setting for your windows of throw. Okay, so I've gone ahead and set up all my limits and travel adjustments on all my channels, and everything is working, moving the amount that I want without any binding. By setting your limits first and setting your overall deflection windows on all your surfaces, you ensure that you're not overdriving your servos in any way. And then when you set up your travels, you want to make sure that you're getting full surface movement throughout the entire range of stick movement. If you're not getting any travel at the very ends, you need to adjust your travel adjustment to ensure that you get full travel at the very ends of your stick movement. Okay, so now that we've set up travels, we're going to go into setting up flight modes or phases in the radio. We're going to set up a few different phases, and we'll run through how that works on the MZ32. Okay, let's go ahead and set up some flight modes, or Graupner calls them phases. So from the home menu, we're just going to hit this menu icon, go to function, and then we're going to go to phase set, and we have one flight mode as default. Now, something to keep in mind is the more you add, the lower the number, the higher the number. So whatever flight mode's on the bottom of your list is going to be your highest priority flight mode. I think it would make more sense if, flight mode 1 was the highest priority, but that's just the way Graupner does it. Now, to add another flight mode, just touch the button here, hit plus, and you get a selection of various labels that they've already made, or you can make your own. I'm going to select thermal. Again, I'm going to add another one, and I'm going to call that speed. One more. Let's go for a launch. So let's say it's a F3J launch. And then let's do our last flight mode, which will be landing. So now we have 5 flight modes, and landing at the bottom of the list here is the highest priority. Now, if you want to reorganize your priorities, all you have to do is touch the number, and you can move the flight modes up and down the list, but we'll leave it where it was. Oops. Cancel this. Okay, so we have our flight modes set. You can set up delays, and obviously we're going to need to set up controls, so what activates the flight mode. There's pre-programmed voice callouts that come in the radio.
Thermal. Launch. Landing.
You can create your own, but you have to actually download some software from Graupner, type in what you want, and then it'll put a voice to it, and then you have to download it to your radio. This is okay. I find this fairly cumbersome. I wish you could just go into this menu, type the name, and have it call out whatever you type in. There's various other radios that do that, so if I had a wish list of upgrades or updates to this radio, that would definitely be one of them, because I don't want to have to go to my computer and download voice files and things like that just to have the radio call out my flight mode. Because if this was actually my F3J model, I would probably have 7 or 8 flight modes. I'd have a thermal 1, 2, 3, whatever, you know, a few different speeds. And then I would have to go into the Graupner software and type out the names and create voice files and then download them into the radio. And it's just a little bit of hassle that I don't really like. But anyway, it is what it is with this radio. So anyway, let's assign... The next thing you have to do is assign some switches or controls to these flight modes. So I'm going to start with landing, and I want my actual throttle stick to be the switch to activate my landing mode. Okay, let's go ahead and set up a switch to activate the landing mode. So let's go to the special menu. Then we're going to go control switch. So we'll hit plus. So we have a new control switch here. And we can rename this if we want. Enter. And we need to assign what controls this switch. So we'll just move the throttle stick, and it automatically assigns that stick to activate the switch. So we'll say OK for now. And now we can set the point at which it actually activates. And they have a helpful output feature here. When this output is lit up, that means the switch is on. Right now it is off. And if I move my stick through their predefined point, it turns on. One thing I noticed right away is that the direction I want is incorrect. So what I'm going to do is reverse this. Now at the bottom side of the travel, so the throttle stick is all the way down now, or the flap stick's all the way down, and this is lit up, so I know it's activated. Now I'm going to change the point at which it activates. Currently it's about 50%, and I'm going to change that to -95. If I can find the 5, there we go, -95, and I'm going to hit enter. So with the stick all the way up, the landing flight mode switch is off, and if I just barely move the stick down past 5%, it activates. So that is our switch setup. So let's go back to our phase set. We'll go to the landing. I've activated the voice. And then we're going to assign the control switch. If we had multiple control switches, they'd be listed here, but we only have one, so we'll just hit OK. And now if I move the throttle stick down,
Landing.
we get a landing call out.
Landing.
Okay. Next thing we can do is assign our other switches for our other various flight modes. I'm going to go ahead and activate all the voice callouts for all the flight modes. I want the top left switch towards the front of the radio. So we'll just hit Control, move the switch where we want it. And I want the middle, I want all the way forward to be launch mode, and that's where we're at right now. So we have off, off, on. That's correct.
Launch.
Okay, and then I want the next mode, speed mode, I want it to be on the same switch but in the middle position. So let's hit that. Move the switch where we want it. Middle position, that's fine.
Speed.
Okay.
Normal.
Normal. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is set up a thermal mode. And I'll use the top left far back switch for that. You can assign any switch you like. And it'll be the middle position. Okay.
Thermal. Normal.
So we have
Thermal.
thermal,
Normal. Speed.
launch,
Landing.
landing.
Launch. Speed. Normal.
Now, since our landing mode is the highest priority, it should kick in no matter what other flight mode we're in. So let's test that.
Thermal. Landing. Thermal. Normal. Landing. Normal. Speed. Landing. Speed. Launch. Landing. Launch.
Okay, so that's working fine.
Normal.
Now, why do I like to have my landing mode as the highest priority? Well, if you're ever in an emergency situation or you need to get on the ground quick, let's say you're doing an F3J launch and you have a line break or a pop off or something and you need to get on the ground quick, I want to be able to have those flaps come down when I pull the flap stick. I don't want to have to remember to hit a switch first and then pull the flap stick. So for me, it's sort of a safety concern. I can make sure I can bring the model down and land it safely. Okay, so we've set up all the flight mode switches, and we have the voices activated. The next thing we can do is actually do some of the mixes and differential and things for the various flight modes. So we'll do the aileron to flap mix, rudder to aileron mix, and flap to elevator mix. And then we'll assign those throughout the various flight modes. And I think that'll wrap it up for the first part of the video, and in the next video we can do some of the camber settings for the different flight modes. Okay, let's set up a mix for our new model. We'll set up the aileron to flap mix, and to do that, simply go to the menu button, and then in the function page, go to wing set, and here we have various options, and the aileron to flap is what we want. Then we have a little connection here which shows if it's on or off. So we'll turn that on, and then we have a section to enable a switch or something to control the feature. And then we have a diagram of the model here. So we turned it on, and then we'll push the model, and then we get basically a curve screen here, or a rate screen. And we're in normal flight mode.
Landing. Normal.
So what we'll do is we'll select the values we want in our cruise or normal mode. And let's just go from the default 100 to 50. Both ways for now. Okay. And then we see it's on, and we can select group or global. So for global, this one value would apply to all the flight modes, or we can have it applied individually to each flight mode. We can assign a different value for each flight mode. Now, before we do anything else, let's just double check and make sure that the flaps are going the right way. So we'll hit the servo screen menu, and we'll move the aileron sticks, which are channels 2 and 5, and 6 and 7 are the flaps, and we can see that they're moving in the opposite direction of the ailerons. So what we need to do is actually reverse those values that we inputted here. So I need to have negative 50s here. So let's go ahead and make these negative values. Okay, and then we'll go back to the servo screen and make sure that the flaps follow the ailerons. And now we see that they're following the ailerons. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go through all the various flight modes and put some values in for each different flight mode. And then we'll move on to the next thing. So after we've done the flap to aileron mix, let's go and do the aileron to rudder mix, which is done in much the same way. So we'll go to menu, function, and then we're going to go to the wing tail page. And then we have different options here, and we want aileron to rudder. Right now it is not active, so we'll activate that, and we will tap on the model. And again, it's basically the same as the flap to aileron mix. So we're going to put values in here. Let's say we want 30% both ways. And then we can check to see if it's actually working on the servo view. So our rudder is channel 4. And as you can see, it's following channel 2. So that's working. So now I'll go back and I will select the list icon here so that I can adjust for each flight mode. Activate. We're in landing mode now. Put a value here. And then I'm just going to go through for each flight mode and put some values in. So I've put in some values for our aileron to rudder mix.
Landing. Normal.
In the various flight modes.
Launch. Speed. Normal. Thermal. Normal.
And now what I'm going to do is move on to aileron differential and flap differential. And to do that, go back to the function menu, hit differential, and we see we have aileron 1-2 differential, flap 1-2 differential, and we have a group or flight mode icon here. So we're going to change both of them to list so that we can change the value individually for each flight mode. And we can't tap the model, so we're going to just tap this value and put in a value. So we'll go 30%, and we'll try 30% to start on the flaps as well. And now if we go through the different flight modes, again, we have to input a value for each flight mode. Doing this for each flight mode really allows you to fine-tune your model. And your aileron value should really be different in various flight modes that include camber changes. So if you have reflex or camber in your wing, your differential should not be the same as if you're in just a regular cruise mode, because you have to account for the deflection of the surfaces with the additional camber. So I'm going to go ahead and put some values in for the various flight modes, and then we'll go to the model and see how it works on the model. Okay, let's see how the mixes we made actually appear on the model. So the first mix we made was the ailerons to flaps. And as you can see, we have the flaps following the ailerons nicely. In all the flight modes. And then we made the aileron to rudder mix. So I'll go over here and I'll move the aileron stick. And as you can see, the rudder follows. Okay, so that's working out well. And then we also put in some values for the differential. And our differential is also working. Again, these are all hypothetical figures that I put in, so you would actually be tuning this specifically to your model and doing some flight testing, especially with differential and aileron to rudder mix. So I think those are some of the basic mixes. The next one we're going to set up is the flap to elevator compensation in the air brake menu, so that when I pull the flaps, the elevator also moves down to compensate for the nose up action that occurs when we deploy our flaps. Okay, we're going to go to the function page, and we're going to go to air brake, and we're going to go to brake to elevator compensation right here. So now when we deploy the flap stick, we can add elevator compensation. So the first thing we're going to do is select a curve type. So I hit other, and I got curve type, and I want a curve, not a spline. So we'll do that. And it's hard to see here, but you can actually hit single point or a straight line or multi-point. You want multi-point, curve. And then here's where we put the values in. So let's just make up some hypothetical numbers. The first thing we'll do is go all the way to the extreme flap deflection,
Landing.
which is the high point, and we'll enter a value. Let's call it 30%. And I want to make sure it's going the right direction, so the first thing I'm going to do is hit the servo monitor. And as you can see, when I pull the elevator all the way down, that's the direction it should travel. Let's deploy the flap stick.
Landing. Thermal.
So that's no flap,
Landing.
full flap. See, the value is -30, which is what we had for the compensation. Well, we had positive 30, but it's moving in a negative direction, and it's moving the opposite direction that we want. So let's go back, and we'll change
Thermal. Landing.
the high point to a negative number. So let's go -30. Okay, so now we only have 2 points. We have initial point, 0, and our high point. Let's add a few more. So let's add one in the middle. We'll move the flap stick to the middle, and then we're going to just hit that plus icon, and we can add a point here. And then let's add 2 more. One here, about 25%. And one at around 75%. And we can change these numbers here and here if we need to change the curve. So let's pretend we need to change the middle part. Let's give this a little more. Let's say we need it to be 19, and we need to smooth out the other points to get a nice curve. Let's say that's kind of that curve is going to work for us after some testing.
Thermal.
There we go.
Landing.
And now you can add even more points if you really want to really fine-tune the compensation.
Landing. Thermal.
So that's basically it for the flap to elevator compensation. It's very easy to do. Now another thing we can do is we can add crow or butterfly if we want. And in order to do that, all we got to do is put a value here in this field. So let's try 50% crow. And let's go to the model and see what some of the changes we made look like on the model. I'm going to deflect. I'm going to deflect the flap stick, and we'll see what our elevator compensation looks like.
Landing. Thermal. Landing. Thermal.
So we see that the elevator compensation is working. And now let's see what our crow looks like.
Landing.
So we'll see that our ailerons are moving down, and we want them to go up. So we need to reverse that value. So we'll just go back to the crow value and change this to a negative value. And then let's go and see how that works.
Landing.
Now we have
Thermal.
crow going the right direction.
Landing. Thermal.
When we pull the flap stick.
Landing. Thermal.
So to sum up what we've done, we've got all our servos working the right direction. We have aileron to flap mix in all our flight modes. We have aileron to rudder mix in all our flight modes. We have differential going in all our flight modes. And we have flap to elevator compensation
Landing.
working
Thermal.
in our landing mode. that is basically some of the bare bones mixing you'll need for a sailplane. I think that should wrap it up for this video. It was pretty easy programming. I would say that the biggest gripe I have at this stage is the inability to type in a name for a flight mode and have the radio make a voice call out for that name. You have to actually download some Graupner software, type in the name of your flight mode. That software will put a voice to that name, and then you have to install that file into your radio. And to me, that's a bit hokey and cumbersome. I wish you could just type the name of the flight mode in the radio, and then the radio would call it out. I've owned several other radios that have that feature. It's not a huge deal, but it's something that sort of irritates me a little bit. So we've gone over flight mode priorities. We've gone over some basic mixing, differential, things like that. We've set up our correct direction of travel for our servos and our travel limits and overall limits. The next thing I'm going to go into are the camber changes in the various flight modes. So that wraps it up for this first video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm sorry some of the video quality wasn't the best. I'm definitely not a professional videographer, but I think you guys got the general idea. Okay, so that was the MZ32 Sailplane Programming Part 1, and look for Part 2 coming soon, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.